Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. And you might think that sounds like a guitar amp. And you'd be right, because this is Airwindows PointyGuitar. So, logically, if we have a guitar amp, we should probably grab a guitar and use that. So give me a second here. As always, performance stuff live. The hum seems to be from the interface. I've just got this Audient thing, and I'm not sure it likes all the lighting I use, but ta-da! This is PointyGuitar. And it is based off of the work that I've been doing with SmoothEQ and the ways in which the other form of SmoothEQ, the one with the angle EQ, I ended up being able to build angle EQ into a fairly steep filter. As you see here, we've got drive, presence, high, mid, low, sub. H speaker and L speaker are simply angle EQ again, but as cutoffs. So that's very important for the top end and the low end. It basically does the job of cabinet simulation. And you hear it sounds nice and clear. And that is because I have it turned down to like 2. So you can do this. But that doesn't necessarily sound like much because you don't normally have a DI guitar that is a big Marshall stack. So we'll turn on Airwindows K Guitar Hall. And I dialed it in to be sort of Eddie-like, you know. But the interesting thing about K Guitar, I'm sorry, that's K Guitar Hall. PointyGuitar is the plugin. Is you get your sounds through adjusting the controls, like high, mid, and low and stuff. Because the way it's working is it's doing multiple bands of EQ. And so it runs more bands than SmoothEQ did. Because there's a lot that I've been working on lately. The angle EQ bands, working as proper crossover type things, they're not nearly as steep as a biquad filter. So I ended up having to stack them up, and that means you get to stack up the gain stages as well. So what's happening is the reason it's not just loaded with aliasing, with the level of gain, this like, and I'm not hearing it properly, but if you run it in a normal setup, you'll be able to get very low latency. I'm only able to monitor it through SWB audio capture to make the video out of. It won't change the sound of it, but it means that I don't get to hear it the way I normally would. Normally, it's got very low latency because it's technically another zero latency plugin with all of this included. So what you do is you turn down presence, and that takes away the stuff that would alias. And you turn up high, and that adds that chug. Or if you turned it down and had mid-range, it's voiced differently. But the main deal with getting these guitar ampy-like sounds is pulling some low out. And then we've also got sub. Sub is going to be doing our extremely low stuff. And what stops that from just sounding like a digital sub low frequency boost is the L speaker. If you're getting guitar sounds using this, you're probably going to want to use H speaker and L speaker to sort of trap it in. I've been paying attention a lot to some YouTube videos I've seen recently. One of them found the secret Dave Grohl Foo Fighters guitar amp, which is apparently a pre-crate amp called the Can. And it's this tiny little speaker in a old gas can. So when you have something like that, or the other one was the Queens of the Stone Age secret amp, which is an old PV, and it's a little practice amp. When you have a tiny amp like that, you do not get these super duper subsonics. And you might think there's a lot of subs there, but this is what it really can do. So if you were trying to pretend that you were a much smaller amp, you go much higher. And then the super lows are going into the distortion, but they're not coming out the pretend speaker because the pretend speaker is done by H speaker and L speaker. But if you don't want to have the rumbly subs getting in the way, you can take them out. But this is an Airwindows plugin, so it gets a little stranger than you expect. Let's demonstrate a little bit more of that. But then we can do this. It'll do strange things for you, or alternately at you, if you push the knobs to crazy places. And so we're going to go back to something that's a little bit more normal. Put back the lows again. And the deal with pulling lows out is if you didn't get a much more mid-rangey tone like a large amplifier. But then if we pull them out entirely, it goes kind of crazy because, again, this is an Airwindows plugin. This is not simply a matter of this is how you do your guitar amplifiers. This is for going kind of insane and inventing new sounds that you didn't have before. Pulling out the lows really takes a chunk out of that stuff. By the way, a way to get a Fender Twinny kind of sound is to lean on the presence, even though that will give you aliasing unless you oversample the plugin. So there's different ways to get different kinds of sounds out of this because it is just a basic sort of concept for getting weird guitar noises. And you don't, also I forgot a thing. If I really wanted to go for that Fender Twinny kind of sound, let's put that back. I am still on the neck pickup with very low gain. And I didn't show you what H speaker does yet. And that's also going to get you closer to the little practice amp sounds and things. Like if you're modeling an amp with an 8-inch speaker, and then say you want to turn it up. You can play with that kind of stuff, or indeed pull back presence, push high, because high is where you're going to have guitar chug sounds. The delay in my headphones is screwing me up pretty good, but this is trapping in the top of the guitar amp sound. And L speaker is trapping in the bottom of the guitar amp sound. And again, low is what you pull out to get more like your extreme metal sounds and things like that. Also mid if you want. And so what you might have left over, the audience that I've got in there is doing a certain amount of noise gating. Its little guitar input has a built-in noise gate that I can't turn off. You can hear it kicking in or not, even though we've got the background noise here. But I've also got this control here, gate, which is not entirely only about whether you have a background noise in there, because I'd rather leave it out completely. If you turn it to 0, it should leave it out completely. When I don't have all my video lights going, I don't get that nasty buzz. But if you're doing some kind of monstrous, horrible metal tone, we can put a little more of the lows and stuff in. One of the keys for doing black metal tones is to get it to distort the cabinet on just lows alone and only then add highs. So we can play that game a little bit. Pull these highs and things back. And remember, there's more gain on tap than this. Dial that in. More highs. And then we get to play with gate. So that's far too distracting. I really must say, trying to deal with this, trying to deal with this with my monitoring chain, suddenly throwing a quarter second of latency on, it's not fun to play with, but usually it is fun to play with. And my hope is that the PointyGuitar plugin could end up useful for people who maybe don't have a giant amp or a plugin or a giant room to put it in. All of that kind of stuff is getting closer to be just in the box, free and open source. Now, it's been possible to download people's guitar rigs and things like that. And there's all manner, like I personally downloaded Neural Amp Modeler and didn't actually end up getting into playing with it very much. but this is my version of it. And my hope is breaking it down into these concepts of like bands of this filtering that's done in this SmoothEQ style way, meaning that if you keep it as flat, it is extremely high fidelity. But there is an additional trick inside this, which I'm making heavy use of. That is, I've got a very simple distortion stage between each of these EQ stages. And as you add more and more gain, it stacks up. You end up running a lot of stages, much like you run a lot of stages on the H speaker and L speaker on the output. And what that means is, as you voice the EQ, it shapes how it hits the distortion, which is not necessarily how we do it even in real life, much less in other people's plugins. That's kind of a new discovery with me working on these other things. It should also work on compression. It should also work for if you wanted to do something like, I know that some electronic musicians would run into the old Craig Anderton quadrafuzz for hyping up their mixes and stuff. And you could probably set this flat, not run too much drive, and open up L speaker and H speaker completely, like just put them to the extremes. Presumably not have any gain. And then you'd be able to do a kind of quadra fuzz overdrive type thing while shaping the sound with the EQ. The thing is, there's no actual multiband distortion in here. It's just a plain distortion stage used after every single band with the 5 different bands of equalization summed back together again, so that if they were flat, it would be perfect and lossless. And there would be no phasing, there would be no anything. Turns out, when you distort after every stage of that resumming it back together again, you get to do a thing where if you throw a bunch of gain on, say, mid, you wind up with this incredibly saturated mid that is also proof from aliasing, because every step of the way it's getting only a little bit of distortion, and then it gets filtered right back out. So that should work pretty well with things like, overdriving subs on a tech house mix or who knows what. My hope is that people enjoy playing with it using guitars as well. Because, I grew up having a guitar. Back in the day, I had to get a little Marshall 12-watt practice amp. And that was all I had for a while. And I know what it's like to not be able to have access to the big sounding things. Well, hopefully with this video I've been able to demonstrate that you can make pretty big sounding noises, even if I was only able to hear it with like horrific latency on my headphones, which kind of spoils it for my enjoyment, but it'll just make it so that I didn't play it cleanly. Hopefully you can get some fun out of that. I initially introduced PointyGuitar by having it set up to as close as I could get to a classic Eddie Van Halen tone, which involved like not pushing the highs all that hard and making sure that the lows and mids were right. But then I quickly started fooling with other things, and you have complete freedom to fool with other things and get whatever wild, crazy tones you imagine. To aim for tones that actually exist and were actually expensive, fancy guitar rigs, I would reference them in something like Airwindows meter. That's what I did. I ran the whole chain into meter and kept tweaking like presence and high and how high was balanced against mid and what low and sub were doing to make it so that it fit the same, like I was getting the same sound signature that I got off of some Van Halen records that I've been measuring. It's a thought. Anyhow, this is the secret surprise, is Airwindows Do Anything guitar amp plugin based on all the most recent plugin EQ discoveries. Hope you like it. I'll get back to work. And again, I could probably do a compressed version of this that would most likely be able to get you things like your Mark Knopfler sounds, it would most likely get you things like the Grateful Dead and Blues for Allah. That compressed tone is quite amazing because it works along the same principles. Typically, if you're listening to a sound and your guitar sound is completely lacking, it's because it's going to be tonally very different. It's going to have like all lower mids in there, which aren't helping you, or it's going to need a lot of high end or a lot of high mids to be pushed. For chuggy guitars, you need that high control because unlike Presence, the high control is the one that's focusing in on around 3K. And that's where the pick scrape happens. But sky's the limit, really. You don't have to just stick. You could probably do your Eric Clapton, Layla, Fender Champ tone, not so much with the high, but with the mid. And just cutting the lows and subs a lot. Remembering, of course, that if you pull them back too far, it'll go insane and start making crazy noises, and then you should put it back up a little bit. But I'm letting you have the full range, including the dangerous and damaging, insane-inducing kind of weird stuff that it's able to do. Because, of course, I am. Why would I not? Hope you like it. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.